right.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Matthew Jorg. I'm here with Colonel Stu Sherard, and I will be interviewing him today on his time in the military and his ministry experience. So I guess we'll just get started.
Go ahead.
What point in your life did you become a Christian?
Okay, well, when I got married, I married carolee, my wife, and she was already a Christian. I was not. I had gone to a church, in a Baptist church for quite a while, but never really committed my life to Christ. And when I was in the military, working long hours, my family relationship wasn't that good. When I was on the faculty at West Point, I was befriended by a chaplain who ran the post chapel, and he got me involved with some of the activities of that. But it wasn't really until I was assigned to the Berlin Brigade in Berlin that I became a Christian. I was befriended by another chaplain by the name of addicts, happened to be a Luthor, and he got me involved in his chapel. And over the course of the year, he told me the problem with my life was I didn't have Christ in it, that I needed to have Christ, and under his ministry, I turned my life over to Christ.
Do you remember how old you were at that point?
I was a major. I think I was 32 years old.
Okay. So, and you went to Vietnam, correct?
Yes, I did.
That was right out of college, or soon after?
Well, I graduated from West Point in 1962, and of course you have to go to some mandatory schools. I was an infantry officer, commissioned in the infantry. Went to the infantry officer basic course at Fort Benning. Went to airborne school at Fort Benning, and then I also went to Ranger School at Fort Benning. And then my first assignment to an actual Army unit was with the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It was while I was there during my fourth year there that I left Fort Campbell and went to Vietnam.
Okay.
That was in 1967.
1967. What were some of the daily routines in Vietnam?
Well, when my first assignment in Vietnam was with the Vietnamese 21st Ranger Battalion. We were assigned to the Highlands area in the middle of the country, big town called Pleiku, and I was part of a 3-man team that were advising this Ranger Battalion. And we've spent quite a bit of time in the field. Here's what you can experience in any kind of a situation like that. Tremendous times of boredom, and all of a sudden, it's just absolute chaos when you get into some kind of a firefight, and adrenaline starts pumping. So it's just boredom, and then there's times of increased anxiety and intensity. That's kind of the way it went for the whole year I was there.
You were there for 1 year?
Yeah, 1 year. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the experience of being an infantry officer. I was a lieutenant and a young captain. And we would just spend routine times on patrol in unit, and then all of a sudden you'd make contact, and it became very chaotic. And I think that's the experience.
Yeah. You are familiar with the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young?
Yes.
Yeah.
By he eventually became Hal Moore. Yeah.
Yeah. You said you were kind of there at the beginning of the first.
Well, the way it worked, Pleiku is in the Highlands, and I was assigned after my being with the 21st Ranger Battalion. There was a brigade from the 101st Airborne Division that came into the Highlands, and I was assigned to the 101st. And but I'm sorry, going back to the 21st Ranger Battalion, we were on patrol. We went to a special forces camp called Play Me, and that we got into a major fight there, and that was when this brigade, of which Hal Moore's battalion was sent out to the Cambodian border, and they got into that big fight with some regular North Vietnamese soldiers, which was the first big battle with the North Vietnamese. So I was at the Play Me camp when we got hit by that same unit, and that was when Hal Moore was brought in, and we went back to Pleiku. That was the end of our. And then they got into a big fight out on the Cambodian border. It's a wonderful book. People ought to read it.
Yeah, I think
see the movie.
Should. Yeah,
I think who was the star in that? Gibson.
Yeah, Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson was Hal Moore.
Yeah.
But Hal Moore, he was a lieutenant colonel, battalion commander at the time. He eventually got promoted to 3-star general, and he retired as a 3-star general. And I think he went back to Vietnam and met the commander of that North Vietnamese regiment that was attacking them at the time, and they walked the battlefield together. It's very interesting.
So, obviously, I wasn't alive during this time to really experience or know what the community was like when everybody came back, but I've seen how it's portrayed in like movies and how it's told in books. But from what I've gotten it was a very negative when
it was a war
back.
that I don't one of the things if you in the armed forces, to be successful you need to have the support of the American people. If they do not support a conflict or a war, it usually does not end well, and I think that's what happened with Vietnam. I think, without getting into the politics of it, I was a soldier. I went where I was supposed to go, did what I was asked to do, but the American people were never involved in that. They didn't see it as a necessary thing to do, and as a result, I think the war ended with mixed results, like a lot of wars do.
Yeah. So what's the major difference you saw in your own life and in your military experience prior to becoming a Christian, after becoming a Christian?
Well, first of all, after I became a Christian, my priorities changed.
Okay.
And my first priority became to God, and my family was close second, which they were not before. And then my career and other things kind of fell in behind that. And that clearly made a huge difference in my life. I settled down. A lot of the tension in our family went away. And of course, Carolee, my wife, was a very stabilizing force. She was already a Christian. Our sons grew up in that environment, which was different. So it was different, huge difference. My life changed.
So Carolee, did she grow up as a Christian, or did she?
She
Okay.
grew up. She accepted Christ early on, I think, as a teenager in a youth group at her church back in Missouri.
Was that difficult being married to a Christian when you're not a Christian yourself? Or?
No, but she wasn't getting the kind of leadership in the home that she really needed to grow as a Christian, which was, I think it points to the fact that you really should marry in the faith. God is gracious. Mm-hmm. He in a lot of cases he overcomes that, but it's not a good idea.
Yeah,
it really isn't. Mm-hmm. And but after I became a Christian at age 32, our family started to flourish. We got our priorities straight, and Carolee grew as a Christian. I did. We got involved with the Officers Christian Fellowship, which is a wonderful organization in the military. Got involved with a Bible-believing church. We grew. So, yeah, it's Scripture is clear and says you should marry in the faith, and there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, God is gracious, and He overcame that in our lives.
When did you really start to get an interest for the ministry?
When I became a Christian in Berlin, Germany, at age 32, we started going to chapel, Army chapels on the post that we always went to chapel, and that was a big influence. And it wasn't really till I retired in 1987 as a colonel, moved back to Tucson, got involved with the chapel at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. It was a godly chaplain out there that we supported, Southern Baptist guy. I really was not comfortable in retirement. I was still in my late 40s, early 50s. You can only play so much golf. And I read a book. By Dr. R.C. Sproul entitled Chosen by God. And it was about the whole idea of predestination and election, and it really resonated with me. And I started reading other books by him. And so I got this idea that I wanted to go into full-time Christian ministry. So I wrote a letter to Dr. Sproul. He was on the faculty of Reformed Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. I was 51 years old. And I said, okay, Dr. Sproul, I'm a retired Army colonel, living in Tucson, Arizona, not having much to do, and I really would like to go explore full-time education or full-time ministry. I'm sure I'm too old to do that, but do you have any ideas? I didn't think I'd hear back from him. He wrote me this long letter back, and he said, number one, you're not too old. Number two, we're opening up this Reformed Seminary next year in Orlando, Florida, Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando, Florida. This would have been 1990. And I'm going to give your name to the chancellor there, and you'll be hearing from him in a couple of days. Well, about a week later, I got this letter saying, send us your resume from West Point. You have to be a college graduate. So I did, and to make a long story short, I started Reformed Seminary in Orlando, Florida in 1990. One of the greatest experiences of my life. I took my wife there. All of our kids were gone, married. And I started seminary at age 51. Graduated 3 years later in 93. Came back to Tucson and interned at a church, a Reformed church, Presbyterian church in America, and I became a pastor, ordained as a pastor in 94, pastored that church for 12 years, and retired in 2006. That's kind of the thumbnail sketch. And that was a great experience. I had two wonderful experiences in my life, 25 years in the military, 14 years in the ministry. And I'm still, you never retire from the ministry. I still fill in, teach Sunday school at church and Bible studies, that sort of thing.
That's interesting. What was it like knowing R.C. Sproul personally?
Dr. Sproul. It was a wonderful experience. I had a number of classes with him, and he moved over from Jackson to Orlando and lived in Orlando. He moved his ministry over there. He's the head of Ligonier Ministries. But he was on the faculty of the Reformed Seminary there, and he taught me a number of classes. The one that I remember most was he taught systematic theology. Okay. And just an incredible teacher. He can take everyday events, I don't know, pumping gas, whatever, and he can turn it to a theological discussion. Plus, he's extremely brilliant, and he's got an incredible education. I think he was educated. He got a doctorate in the Free University over in wherever that is, the Netherlands, I think. But he's told me many times that they were so liberal and out of touch with real Christianity that really caused him to start thinking about Christianity, and it turned him around. And but he's a brilliant man. He's also a godly man, a very friendly man. He had a tremendous impact on my life. And when he died a couple of years ago, it was kind of like a link to my past. It died, and I miss him a lot. He was. Plus, I got to tell you this about R.C. Sproul. He was an incredible teacher, but he didn't like to grade papers. So he was a sugar daddy in terms of giving out grades to his students. I got an A in his course. I'm not sure I deserved it. But he was a dear man, and he also taught me a course on Jonathan Edwards, great Reformed theologian during the back in the 1800s, during the Great Awakening. So he was a very instrumental man in my life. I really enjoyed being around him for 3 years. Miss him today. Yeah, he was the guy that started everything for Stu Sherard in the ministry.
Was there any, one thing that you kind of like your takeaway thing from him that really stuck with you, if there is?
Yeah, I think just the fact that he was a godly man who cared for his students, and plus he was an incredible teacher. He could take these very complex theological concepts like election and predestination and articulate them in a way that dumb, naive seminary students could understand them.
Yeah. But yeah, that's great.
Anything else?
I'm not sure. I think that should be good.
Yeah. Did we get it all?
I think so. Well, thank you very much for this.
Okay, that was good. I enjoyed it. Kind of reliving some of those things.